Hello guys, Jerry explores history. We're going to explore a very important turning point in the history of infantry warfare. Romans versus Greeks. This was the decisive battle that showed where infantry battle was going towards. Basically, the Roman legions versus the Greek phalanx. Who would come out on top? Let's explore. The Battle of Cynoscephalae. This took place in the Thessaly region of Greece, 197 BC. At this point, this was after Alexander the Great. After Alexander died, his generals kind of fought among themselves. Macedon, his home state, is now led by another Philip. Not his dad Philip II, but another Philip. Cynoscephalae takes place between the Romans and the Macedonians, those Greeks. Now, before we go over the battle, we have to explore how the phalanx has changed. A lot of you have seen our videos about Athens versus Sparta, and then later how Thebes beat Sparta. Philip II, Alexander the Great's father, lived with the Thebans, and he got to see how the Thebans changed their military to beat the Spartans. And he also got to observe how the Athenians kind of changed their military too. By the time Philip II was plowing through Greece, his phalanx was already different than the phalanx that we're used to from, let's say, movies like 300. Training-wise, Philip decided to go with what the Thebans did, which was also what the Spartans did, which was you have a professional military. It's not just like how many of the other Greek city-states did it. Oh, it's time to fight. All right, farmers, carpenters, philosophers, whatever, pick up your spears and your shields and go fight. It wasn't like that. The sacred band in Thebes, professional. The Spartans, professional. So Philip II said, okay, our army's going to be professional. On top of that, instead of a shield wall like what the Spartans did or what the rest of the Greeks did, let's take the spear, let's make it 15 to 20 feet instead of the current length, and now we have this wall of spears. So instead of a shield wall, a spear wall. So if you got in the front of that spear wall, you'd have 5 really long spears stabbing at you. And of course, it was many people deep. It was definitely a force to be reckoned with. By making their spears, called the sarissa, much, much longer for the sake of engaging the enemy quicker and engaging the enemy with more overwhelming force, a few things had to change. So if you look at how the phalanx changed between the hoplite era and the later Alexander the Great and after post-classical Greek era, the shields got much smaller. Before, the word hoplite came from the word hoplon. Hoplon, the big Greek round shield, it got much smaller. Why was that? Because to hold a 15 to 20 feet pole, you had to use both hands. You couldn't have one hand carrying a big shield, another hand carrying such a long spear. So you had to have both hands holding your spear, and then you attached a little shield on your left side. The shield changed, no longer the hoplon, forgot what the shield was called now. And then they had the long sarissa. The formation got tighter, right, because the shields were smaller, and the point is, just stab, go into it full force. Maybe you'd be 15, 20, 25 people column deep, and the first 5 rows would have their spears pointed directly at the enemy. So you'd have a row of 5 people stabbing, and then the rest of them would keep their spears kind of at different angles, so that way when projectiles from the enemy came, they'd be able to kind of parry. So this was very powerful. Think of it as an overwhelming pin, right? A little pin. But I think any of you listening already can see some weaknesses. First of all, with spears that long, you better be on flat ground. If you are slightly elevated from the person next to you or person behind you, suddenly your formation gets distorted and you're not going to be able to have the same effect attacking wise. And on top of that, because the spears are so long, if there's any kind of elevation, it gives gaps for people to come in through the spears. If you bypass the first row of spears, you have the second row, then the third row, and then the fourth row, and then the fifth row. Once you bypass the fifth row, you're in. The Phalanx at this point, as a final countermeasure, would have a short sword, just in case you got through all the spears. On top of this, if I'm standing very close to my buddies, and I have a spear that's 15 to 20 feet, how am I gonna be flexible? Let's say we need to turn to the right because we're getting flanked. Could I just turn with my spear held by both hands to the right? No, I'm gonna hit the person in front of me, hit the person to the side of me. Try turning to your right. Y'all hit each other, right? It requires a coordinated effort. Everyone has to raise their spears, turn, and then put their spears down again. That requires a lot of command, a lot of control, a lot of inflexibility. So it was very good headlong, but if you flanked them or got behind them, the Phalanx was done. So that was a big weakness that we're gonna see the Greeks get destroyed because of. And a third weakness of this Greek Phalanx was the initiative part. What we're gonna learn about the Romans is that although there was a general commanding, each centurion, a centurion is a person that leads a group of legionnaires. Century means 100, so he led around 100, though the numbers sometimes varied. Each centurion had a little bit of flexibility, so command was a little bit more distributed, more horizontal than vertical. This was a key turning factor, decisive factor in why the Romans won at Cynoscephalae. Before we keep going, let's talk very briefly about the Battle of Pydna. And the reason I wanted to describe the Battle of Pydna was because this is one of the cases where you really saw the difference between the Roman and the Greek way of fighting. I made the Roman note card smaller to show a more decentralized, flexible type of formation. Each Roman block, I'll say, is like a maniple. A maniple is about 100 people. That's just what they called their formation. So each Roman maniple is indicated here. It's not exactly to scale. One of the key decisive moments in Pydna, the Greeks are coming in with their immense spears, 5 deep, just coming in at the Romans. But the terrain, as there's terrain, it's creating little gaps in their phalanx. So what do the Romans do? The Romans, the individual maniples, take initiative, going through the gaps, and start flanking these guys. And boom, in this battle, because of elevational differences, not all the spears were aligned correctly. Some of the Roman troops slipped through certain gaps caused by elevation in the Greek phalanx and started hacking away. So now it's 176 BC. The Romans, led by Flamininus, take on Philip V, leading his own phalanx. They're both numbered at around 25,000, 26,000 troops, so they're basically equal in numbers. But how do the Greeks lose so badly? Let's explore the battle. So the terrain was very interesting. I've indicated the hills here. First of all, it was really bad fog for most of the day, and so the scouts on both sides kind of stumble on each other. The fighting starts with the skirmishers, and eventually what happens is more and more Romans and more Greeks get pulled in. So in addition to the skirmishers and the scouts and the cavalry and everyone fighting, Philip V on the Greek side, the Macedonians, commit about 8,000 of his phalanx. They start fighting and they are charging downhill at the Romans. So the Romans are getting beat back, getting destroyed, clobbered on this side. Flamininus is in here trying to command, trying to rally his troops. He notices that on this side, the left side of the Macedonians, they haven't exactly fully lined up yet. So Flamininus, marked by this guy, goes over, rallies his troops, they run up the hill, charge towards these guys, and they smash at these Macedonian people. You can call them phalanges. You can smash at them before they're ready. It's a fierce fight. It's a fierce fight. The Romans are having an advantage right now. You know, they're kind of having the edge. The Romans brought along some war elephants. They send the war elephants into the Greeks, and this was the final turning point of the right side of the Roman line, the left side of the Greek line. The Greeks start running, they start scattering, the Romans start chasing them. At this point, Remember we talked about earlier how the Roman way of command was slightly more horizontal. So the local leaders of their maniples could think on the spot and make adjustments. As these guys were running and chasing after the Greeks, they looked this way and saw the Greeks pushing, and the Greeks were dominating the Romans on this side. So they said, wait a minute, we don't need to chase those guys. Let's help our brothers there. So they go here. They go here, into the back, into the flanks of these Greeks. What's going to happen? The Greeks can't just turn around, right? It takes a very organized, collected effort for them just to turn around. So, smash them, destroy them, and eventually the leftover Greeks flee, including Philip, who was commanding them. The Roman system was just more superior because it was more adaptable to the fog of war. In battles, in wars, nothing happens like you plan. You have to make split decisions. And that's what the Roman system was so good at. Once they broke through the left side of the Phalanx, a few of the Maniples realized, oh, let's help our brothers who are getting killed on our left side. So they immediately rallied their troops and made a switch and turned the battle around. So it's not just the Greek phalanx, the Macedonian phalanx was inflexible, but even if they were flexible, if their spears were shorter, or maybe they practiced more of how to turn even with their long spears, the key is the organization, the leadership wasn't as horizontal. So that Greeks lost, not just because their phalanx formation was inferior to the Roman legionnaire formation, but their way of leadership wasn't as horizontal as the Roman adaptable maniple system. So we can continue exploring how fighting evolved once the Romans took over the Mediterranean world. This battle was one of the turning points. The Greek world was on its way down and the Roman world was on its way up. So thank you guys so much for watching. And if you guys want more explorations into ancient battles, we will do it with our signature note cards and random footage from our neighbors. Jerry Explores Chinese out. More to come.